Hey, I'm Jeremy Johnson, and this is a talk called Making It Stick: How to Get Customers to Adopt and Use Your Products and Services. So I was looking for a couple different quotes here, and here's one that I've always liked. It's from a kind of famous ad writer. He says, if you're opening a hamburger stand, the most important advantage isn't the secret sauce, it's a starving crowd. Now, when working with startups and new product kind of development, a lot of people just imagine that there's a starving crowd just waiting for their product to launch and they can just get it to market. It's going to be successful. Unfortunately, that's often not true. And so the question is, what if you don't have a starving crowd, or maybe that's a hypothesis that of course you'll need to validate later. A couple other quotes here that I thought were interesting. I was trying to find something kind of outside of the world of UX. Peter Drucker, who is more in the management space, but talks about to know and understand the customer so well, the product or service fits him or her and sells itself, right? So it's how do you understand them so well? Seth Godin says to make change happen, you must understand what drives a person's behavior. So what is their behavior? And so the key to making it stick is really not fancy design, fancy animations, gamification. Those do help, but really it's understanding and behavior. So how do we understand? There's a term called discovery, which I'm very fond of, and things you must know when you think about it. You must know what you don't know, which sounds sometimes counterintuitive to folks who haven't been in this space for a long time. You need to know the customer and you need to know their behavior, right? This is what we're trying to find out in discovery. And in the beginning, this is Marty Kagan who, if you're in product, you're probably, I've read the book. I like pretty much everything that he writes, and he's still continuing to update things after his series of books. But he said, I want a term that conjured up a very different image in the minds of product managers and product teams. I want them to have an open mind, to know what they can't know and admit what they don't know, which is hard for product people because sometimes you feel like you are hired to know instead of to find out. So why do startups fail? There's lots of kind of lists of startups and why they succeed or fail. And a big one is no market needed. Also, sometimes it might be called product market fit. The thing was launched, and to the earlier quote, there was no starving crowd waiting for that product. And discovery helps improve your odds for success, not only in the startup world, but also in the business world and for kind of your more standard product development. And unfortunately, the odds of success are lower than you think. And this is why you want to try to understand things as quickly as possible, like lean startup and lean UX and philosophies around getting things out there very quickly. And it says Microsoft declared that roughly 1/3 of their ideas yield negative results, 1/3 no results, and 1/3 positive results. So you have a 1 in 3 chance there. Streaming service Netflix believes that 90% of its ideas are wrong. And of course, they're known for getting things out there pretty quickly. Same with Google. Google reported that as much as 96.1% of their ideas fail to generate positive results. Very Google-like, 96.1%. And Booking.com. When I worked at Travelocity, we were always looking to Booking.com because they had this amazing platform where they were able to get things out and test and learn. And they said 9 out of 10 of their ideas fail to improve metrics. And this is where you have to learn quickly. This term product market fit, if you're in product, it's primarily your key role among many other things product folks do, but it means being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market. One example that I love because it was so huge and such a failure, but there was a group that they said, hey, we're looking to create and seed a mobile video platform with curated professional shows made specifically for the mobile user. And like a lot of things, when you say it, sounds reasonable, sounds plausible, right? This group spent $2 billion getting to market. So new tech platform, marketing, expensive content, because they're trying to make very curated shows as in reality television. And again, this is a true story. And so the question I always ask is, what percentage of 2 billion, if you knew that's what it was going to take to get to market, or in your world, maybe it's 2 million or 1 million or whatever, what percent would you spend on making sure you're heading in the right direction and reducing that overall risk? Would you do 1%, 5%, 10%, 20%? What is that percentage of risk tolerance to get something out? Now, of course, if you can get something out very quickly at a very low cost, I would say that number would be pretty low. If it's going to take a little minute to get something released and it's a kind of an expensive project, you'll probably want to spend a little bit more. And so this was Quibbly, and kind of when people armchair quarterback afterwards, after they went under, Quigley never ran an MVP, minimal viable product. They didn't really do any experimental public betas to test what kind of content and what kind of features resonated well with their target users. And they just had this assumption that people would like to watch short drama series episodes when they only had a few minutes to kill on their phone. And they just never validated it. And because of this, in this case, it was Katzenberg, who was great at raising money. They essentially ran a $2 billion high-risk experiment, and unfortunately it failed. So there's actually sites that talk about this and catalog this when it's failure-y. And they have a kind of this graveyard of unfortunate startups that failed over time for various reasons. And they actually list out the reasons, and you can sort by this. But if you look at the reasons, a lot of these can actually be, you can make sure these don't happen if you do discovery properly. Failure to pivot, lack of focus, lack of product market fit, PMF, no market needed, poor product. These are things that UX design and UX research can really help with. So let's talk about the process. Like, what kind of process can you run to make sure your thing sticks with its audience? Another quote from Marty Kagan: there are any number of techniques used to help with discovery, and new ones emerge all the time. An MVP is a discovery technique that is, as is design thinking, as is customer development, as is jobs to be done. Basically, there's just like a lot of frameworks and methods out there. And what's interesting is I'll still see today people post on LinkedIn, oh, this great framework, this great process. And a lot of these are actually pretty old. Service design, 1982, design thinking, 87, jobs to be done, 1990, and so on. So these have been around for quite some time. And actually, many of these are good. And this is where it's really up to us to understand these frameworks and what works well in which environments and which contexts and which organizations to solve which problems. One additional one is the double diamond, which is from 2005. So 20 years old now. And they talked about making sure that you're solving the right problem. So spending a little bit more time in that problem space to make sure you are sprinting in the right direction. And then making sure you're solving that problem correctly, saturating the idea space with lots of different concepts and ideas and design and testing to that final idea that gets launched. And so there are lots of these. As designers, yes, we do like frameworks, we like methods, we like activities, we're inventing new ones all the time. But this is our job, right? As designers, like, our job is to take all these frameworks and help demystify it a little bit. So taking these and then putting it into action, right? Are we learning, testing, validating? And again, looking at those three things: what don't we know? How can we get to know the customer better? And how can we get to know their behavior better? And so it's up to us to take these kind of blocks and put them into a plan. And again, depending on the scale of the project and a lot of the context around your given project or product area, put together that actionable plan that's going to work. And so in this case, here's like a 6-week plan, and you can book out all the different activities that you're going to do throughout there. And it makes it very visible. Of course, hopefully we're working with the product team to understand that context, those constraints, and those business metrics so that we can make it a very actionable experience. So at the end of this, there is this kind of plan of action to move forward. And some of it's pretty simple. Like, it's not rocket science. The one that I always liked, and just is like, of course, right, it makes sense, pretty simple, is exposure hours. And someone that's been in the UX space for a very long time talks about the closest thing I've ever found to a silver bullet when it comes to reliably improving the products and experiences that organizations produce. And that predictor was how much time they spend with their customers watching them use the product, right? And this could be employees on the enterprise side. This could be consumers. And I used to use this chart when I would talk to organizations about like how they're getting their customer understanding. In some product teams, and the joke here, of course, is this is the Lion King. If you want to learn about lions, right, you could read National Geographic, you can go watch The Lion King on Broadway, or you can go to a safari, right? And one of these is probably going to get more realistic information and drive deeper empathy than another. And of course, I typically try to coach organizations to move more towards that, making sure you have a qualitative mix of data with your customer, your end users. Really, our goal here is to drive clarity, walk a mile in their shoes, and learn what you don't know, which again, it is hard in today's world where I think a lot of people think they're expected to know all the answers. And then on the research side, we really need to learn well, like how to tell that story really well, right? Learn to tell your user's story, make it very actionable, and make sure you're talking about which direction you need to go in next. I was working with a C-level executive, and he had this quote where he said, I got walls full of journey maps. I got walls full of empathy maps. I got walls full of the Post-it notes. What do? I don't know what to do next. I don't know what I should be doing next. And that's a lesson to just make things very actionable. And that's partially a storytelling exercise and partially just making sure that you understand even their world and business lingo as an example to showcase the direction it should go and how it's going to help them. Recently I was at a meetup with some product owners, and Yeah, one of them mentioned that they'd worked with some UX researchers, and what I got from it was he felt like they were a little too academic and they didn't really tell him anything he didn't know, and they didn't really give him an actionable plan. And so as a product owner, I don't know, it took a long time and I didn't really get what I wanted out of it. I don't know if I'm going to go back to that. So learn to tell the user story, make it actionable, and then make sure you're telling them which direction that they should go. And yeah, for me, just at a high level, it's what are those goals? What sometimes it's greenfield. So it could be very open for interpretation. Sometimes you're testing a hypothesis, but maybe you're looking to, and of course, increase revenue sales or increase margin, reduce costs, right? Like somewhere around there. What are those contexts and constraints? Like, are you trying to get something prepared for a conference for your users? That's going to be a time constraint. Or maybe next year, the budget's only so big. So you're only going to spend so much money. And so you have to be very thoughtful about how you're prioritizing features and functionality. So what's the general context and constraints? And then what methods and activities are you going to use? Again, we just saw huge lists, tons and tons of methods out there and activities. You design that plan for the team, go out and get the data, get that research, qualitative, quantitative mixed methods, and then come back with a report that's really the story of what's happening, points to bring them closer to that end user, but then the plan and the action to move forward and how it should affect the product going forward and what your hypothesis even is on if this changes or if this improves, like here's actually the business metric that's going to affect, hopefully again, tied back to those goals. That's how I feel like you really make a product stick, by understanding the end user. But there are actually lots of things you could do after that, after you are sprinting in the right direction, right? That can help make it stick. So on the interface side of things, gamification, obviously very popular. And there's a lot of things here where it's just as human beings, we're enticed or incentivized by various means. And speaking of methods and activities, I know there are whole kind of UX card decks with all these built in that you can play with your teams. But like, for example, even things like to-do list has karma levels now. So as you're going through your productivity throughout the day, you're actually checking things off. And of course, people love checklists and people love checking things off and showing progress, right? So gamification, motivational mechanics, seamless onboarding, and early value delivery. And this is a hard one. Like a lot of apps are banned in their first month. In fact, one stat said it was 90% of apps are banned within the first month. And so it's like, how do you get them to value quickly? And sometimes you have to actually push them to get to that value, because sometimes it could be a somewhat more complex kind of value exchange. So like at SoundCloud, as an example, they have an onboarding, and of course it tells you if you're completing it, but they know through their own metrics, I'll assume, that they know what makes a customer stick. And so they're making sure that they do all those things. Hey, here's what you need to do, because we know if you do these things, you're more likely to stick and find more value with this platform. Micro interactions, micro UX. I'm a big Robinhood fan. I think if someone said, what's the one app that really nails just really sharp micro interactions, micro UX, everything from the haptic feedback you get as you're pushing across a chart to the little animations. Now, I will say they keep adding features and functionality, so it is getting to be a bit like a kitchen sink. So arguably the navigation, I would say, is sometimes I can't find something, right? Which is obviously a negative. But on the micro interaction side, it's just so tailored and so precise. In fact, we were talking with a client that was in the financial services space, and their CEOs, I just want our app to be as good as Robinhood, because it does give that essence of being a very, very polished app that obviously has value because it has your money in it. The loss aversion, encouraging retention. These are ones that I'm sure most of you have probably seen. If you use Snapchat or Duolingo, you get these streaks going, and it's interesting how just behaviorally people don't want to, it's a loss aversion, right? If you start a streak, you don't want to lose it. And streaks in some of these cases are actually really powerful, and sometimes even tried to be monetized in some of these situations. Now let's talk about the brand. So how can you use emotion to make it stick? If you take any app or digital service or really any experience and you ask, what is that signature moment? Like, what is that one thing that really locks that brand in, something that you recall, something that differentiates you in today's world where a lot of things seem like they're very similar in some cases? What is that signature experience that you can call out? And so some examples here are like Spotify, the Wrapped recap, right? This was something that they did and they decided to own that. It's obviously very related to their core product. I think arguably people talk about it, is it getting a little stale now that it's been out for a number of years? But yeah, everyone shares it. Everyone talks about it and they own it. And another group could come and do it, like Apple Music could do it. But obviously Spotify owns that now as kind of a signature moment that's difficult to replicate. And you're designing with the motion and adding a distinct brand personality. Slack, although I feel like, because I use Slack all the time, and I'm like, are they still doing this? Or do I just not notice it anymore? But Slack, right? They had really good kind of copywriting, they had fun loading screens, and to give it kind of a playfulness to it. That was great. And of course, this is one of those products that has more of a consumer, arguably, set of features, functionality, design, and detail, but won the enterprise over. And because people in enterprise like good software, right? And kind of Trojan horsed itself into teams and then grew through official channels and procurement to get things into the enterprise organizations. The next is AUI. So, like, how can you use AI to make it stick? And it's interesting because we've been talking about adaptive interfaces forever. In fact, I had one of my early bosses, I can remember him saying, and this would have been many years ago, hey, if you're over 65 and you like log into the portal, just make the text bigger. Just default to that. It's not that hard, right? Because statistically, most people have vision problems. And so it's like, how can you use AI? And I feel like there was a promise. And I think one, the technology probably wasn't really there. And then two, I know a lot of organizations have a hard time getting out a good product, let alone a product that is adaptive. And I think that's the other problem. But there are some examples here. Obviously, personalization, recommendation. This is in the news right now with TikTok and how they have this amazing recommendation engine that instead of being based on who you know and what others like, it can very quickly hone in on what you like. And this is something that even countries are fighting about where this personalization needs to sit. Micro personalizations and just kind of like small personal touches. Netflix has some famous stories here around like when you see tiles for shows on Netflix, those, or they say, are customized to you. Maybe if it's on your kids' account, you might see pictures of kids versus if you're on your account and you're a bit older, you might see the adults in the show, right? It's actually tailoring the individual tiles based on who you are. Predictive UX, this was something else again that I think has been thought about, but maybe it was a little before its time, but I still don't know that I see it in a lot of apps. But when I was at Travelocity, we had talked about this and there was an example around, hey, if you're in the app around lunchtime, you're probably looking for lunch. And I don't even know that Google Maps does this today. If I pull up Google Maps at between 11:30 and 12:30, I don't really get a sense that it's like showing me lunch, which is like it's an obvious thing that yes, if you're looking for locations or travel tips around that time, you might be looking for lunch, right? And so it's adding that predictiveness so the interface feels more seamless and more intuitive. Dynamic onboarding flows. There's a story about a fitness app that put a GPT powered onboarding and it cut early drop offs by 43%. And it makes sense, right? So it's like GPT or any of these kind of AI technologies could probably do a better job of like noticing signals faster. And so in this case, if you're a seasoned workout individual versus someone who's maybe never worked out, right? Like you might actually drastically modify that onboarding experience, get them to the app versus walk them through the app. And like with technologies today, we should be able to do that. And then, yeah, two more. One is adaptive UI layouts and navigation. And this could be role-based. This doesn't necessarily need to be predictive or AI, but again, something else we've been talking about forever. And I think there are bits of this in different apps, but if you are a power user versus a novice user, if you have job A or role A versus role B, like you just get a different visualization, right? Or you get different pieces of the analytics pushed to you or higher up on the page. And talks about how there are a lot of e-commerce sites out here that reorder categories and deal banners based on browsing and season. And then what's really interesting is this, I've heard it called a couple different things, but this reinforcement learning for UI optimization, but basically think of it as almost like constant A/B testing in a way, but the interface can adapt, right? If it knows you always go to this one area, or it knows that you're more likely to do this thing, or it knows this is the task that you're currently trying to do, where maybe everyone who has an app has a different experience. I'll use travel again as an example. It's always a fun example with lots of twists and turns across that customer experience journey. But if I pull up my app and I am a first class passenger versus economy passenger, right? There's different options. There's different things for me to do. If I'm a frequent flyer and I fly once a week versus I fly twice a year. And arguably you could say different things are important to those users, or that you could actually see them using the app and you can start to prioritize and deprioritize different things. And this goes all the way to, this is slightly more future state, but having AI understand what the user's task is and then build a flow almost on the fly using your design system patterns, of course, as someone's going through something. So this world where, if your dad calls and says, I'm having trouble with this app, the interface could be totally different than your version of it because you're obviously two very different personas. So those are just some ideas for making it stick, how to get customers to adopt and use products and services, which is very difficult. This QR code here is my LinkedIn if you want to connect. But again, it's easy to say, oh, gamification, oh, great user experience, oh, great visual design. Those things matter. But understanding people, that's going to be the key to combat all those unfortunate failures in the startup world and in the product world where most ideas don't stick. So thank you.